which is the feminine aspect of the dark waters that gave birth to Atum. So we're still talking about the watery substance of the void, which is the yoni, which is the womb, which is the vagina. And through that womb, throughout that watery substance and black waters, which is the triple blackness of the third trimesters within the womb, which is why the waters of Nun are referred to as the chaotic black waters, because simultaneously we are talking about the triple blackness of gaseous melanin matter of space, which you can say is a black hole, which is a yoni and a vagina, and it is being imposed or anthropomorphized into a woman named Nunet or Nun, who is the chaos waters that gave birth to Atum and Ra and Ptah. And these are all creator gods. So basically what we're saying is the female anatomy being representative of the black waters of Nun gave birth to every primordial god that we refer to today as the most powerful and oldest male gods. One of them is Ptah, who is called the architect. Now, I believe, I might be wrong on this one because sometimes I do get the mythology mixed up, but I believe Ptah spit out Ra, or Ra came out of the hill of Atum. One of those. It seems to get switched around depending on what kingdom, if you're in the old kingdom, middle kingdom, or new kingdom, which kingdom you're referring to. The mythology gets switched a little bit, but it's always the black waters of Nun that's given birth to all of these deities, period. So what are we saying that to say? From the beginning of time in Africa, the black woman, the black mother, the triple black goddess has been the primary worshipful and the one that was given the greatest respect of all societies. Now, let's go to Europe, and let's go even before then, because when we talk about Europe, one thing that doesn't get mentioned enough is that this peninsula, falsely called a continent. There are not 7 continents on this planet. That is a false lie. There are only 6 continents, and every continent begins with the letter A and ends with the letter A. Antarctica, Asia, America, Africa, Australia. This is an encoded aspect, by the way, y'all. This is encoded. Now, I know we go, well, America, these words, these are new words. Yes, but they come from far more ancient words that, of course, still had the letter A, or still had the context and the connotative aspect of the tonal aspect of A. All right. Even the first king to unify Egypt with Upper and Lower, who has many names, but one of the oldest names found that has not been Europeanized and not Greekanized is called Aha. AHA. That was the name of that king, who was the first king to unite the very oldest first dynasties of Egypt, who of course came from Nubia. Now, everywhere we go, we find that the woman is worshipped without no exception, no denial. When we talk about Europe, what are we really talking about? We are talking about the peninsula of Asia, falsely called a continent, but we're also talking about the name of a Phoenician princess. But who are the Phoenicians? The Phoenicians are in direct relation to the ancient Egyptians. They are nothing but their cousins and their first cousins. When we look at the word Europe, U-O-R-O-P-E, I believe, probably spelled that wrong, but that's all right, who cares? When we talk about Europe, we're actually talking about Europa. And Europa was a black princess who was given Europe as a present. Now, once again, remember, Europe's not a continent. Europe's a peninsula. Europe is a tiny little nothing place. Her father bestowed her Europe as a gift and named it after her Europa. All right? And this is why the Greeks have taken on the Phoenician dialect. If you study the Greeks worship the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. And when the Greeks refer to the Phoenicians refer to the Egyptians as their parents. So when we go down this chronology of line, we find that we are the progenitors. We are the mothers and fathers of all these so-called advanced civilizations that white people want to put before our own. Now, let's stick to Europa. Now, once again, Europa is not a continent. It is a peninsula of Asia. And during, not this time, but prior to this time of Europa being named after this Phoenician princess, we can go back 40,000 years to the Grimaldi tribe who inhabited Europe for 40,000 years prior to what we know Europe as today. Now, when we look up the Grimaldi tribe, what's quite interesting of this tribe is there is literally not a single depiction of a male statue. Every statue that you find in the Grimaldi tribe is of a very voluptuous, a very exaggerated, and let's not say exaggerated, because we can go into the tribe that the beautiful queen has just shown. If you look up there, the European gave her body type the claim of a disease, and it was called stereophagia. And they said having a voluptuous buttocks and protruding breasts was a damn disease. It was a deformation of the body. It's called stereophagia. Now, once again, this is giving you the mindset of the male who is ruling your society and making your voluptuousness a sickness and a deformity. Once again, I'm connecting the patriarchal aspect of this European to the demoralization, to the denigration, and to the deformation of the beauty of our women, which we worship, making figurines and making all types of pottery to commemorate her beauty. All right. Now, once again, when we go into the Venus, which is the worship of the goddess and also called yoni worship as well, we find numerous statues of I forget the full name, excuse me, but it's Venus something else. And we find endless statues of peppercorn hair, naughty nappy hair, voluptuous breasts, large buttocks, and this was the symbol 40,000 years ago of the only gods on this planet that were worshipped, which were goddesses and women. Once again, when you go to look up the Grimaldi and you go to look up these terms that I'm giving you, there is not one single male statue. Can we please think about this? So 40,000 years ago in Europa, falsely called Europe today, you mean to tell me that we have a tribe called the Grimaldi, and I'm sure that there were men there, that literally spent majority of their time creating depictions to worship of the woman's body, but I cannot find a single depiction of a male. Now, that means something. You can't tell me that I'm in a stage of abuse of my Black woman, I'm in a stage of disrespect and suppression of my Black woman, yet every single depiction that is found within the region I ruled for 40,000 years is only depicting Black women. I find that quite interesting, in how we choose to confuse this and how we choose to superimpose white culture onto ourselves as if our Black men have always abused and suppressed women, as white men have always done in their own culture and society, as well as global colonization of this planet. Now let's go to Americas, ancient Americas at that. We can go to what's called the Catal, excuse my pronunciation, I know I'm pronouncing this wrong, but the Catal Hayuk, which is one of the pre-aspects to the Yucatan dynasties. When we go to the Catal Hayuk people, we find that the same depictions we find in African Grimaldi culture in Europa, we find the same depictions in this place, where the so-called Aboriginal, or more precisely indigenous people of 6,000 to 7,000 BC made sculptures of very voluptuous mother goddesses sitting on a throne, large breasts, large belly, impregnated. Once again, we find no evidence of women being suppressed, of women being abused, of women being disrespected within our most ancient pre-colonial cultures, from Africa to Central America and so on and so forth, which, by the way, if you look at these statues carefully, what are you looking at? You're looking at a Mother Olmec. You're looking at a Mother Queen Olmec. Because as we should be well aware of, the Olmec civilization predates the Mayan, predates the Aztec. And as a matter of fact, the same way that the Phoenicians regarded the Egyptians is the same way that the Mayan regarded the Olmec. But of course, they don't want to talk about that. And the correct name is the Tomoanchan, Tomoanchan, Tomoanchan peoples, who are known for the rubber tree plant, which, by the way, is indigenous to Central Africa. So you mean to tell me these people within the Central Americas referred to as the Olmec, the word Olmec means rubber people, by the way. They are known for the production of rubber products, rubber balls, and even rubber soles of shoes. Now, once again, we are talking BC times. We talking anywhere between 1500 BC to 800 BC on this land. And I'm very skeptical about those time frames because, remember, they like us to fit in a 6,000-year box. Because I can even go into Central Africa, Zing Empire, Z-I-N-G-H, the Zing Empire, which predates all of so-called ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamia, going back 15,000 BC. And even when you study that empire, who at the time that there is very little recorded document of, you find that a ruler who's called the God King, Tariq, the God King of the Zing Empire, okay, who actually inhabited and traveled to Central America, giving the red, black, and green colors on many of the pottery that we see in Central America today. So that goes into a lecture I did for a Pan-African organization that didn't like me very much, because a lot of people like to attribute the red, black, and green flag to Marcus Garvey, which is false history, because the red, black, and green colors that were the flag for this universal empire, which was called the Zing Empire, goes back to 15,000 BC. And I don't think Marcus Garvey was anywhere around at that time. And also, these colors were superimposed onto the other civilizations of the world, such as Central America, as well as parts of Mesopotamia. Now, let's stick to the topic. We're still referring to abuse of our Black women in historical aspect. As I've shown you, the only historical abuse that we can find as the most ancient and the most oldest goes back to Mesopotamia only. And then if you look up La Plata Valley, which goes back to the archaeological finds in America, the only other civilization that they seem to put adjacent with that old finding is the Greek the Greek civilization, which, once again, anytime they want to support something, they have to go back to Europe, because they have no other place on this earth to refer to when talking about domestic violence. You don't find it in the Aborigines of Australia, which go back 40,000 to 70,000 years. And if you study the Aborigines of Australia, they actually have rock formation and archaeological evidence that goes back 70,000 years in Australia. And they were just having a conflict not too long ago about how the British keeps instituting laws, and there was one indigenous Australian woman there. And I would love to share this with y'all. Maybe after this, we share this with the queens in here, because she went off on them. Because it's always white people who are dictating our terms, our laws, our definitions. And this Australian queen, this Aborigine queen, went off on that panel that she was a part of and reminded them that our land goes back 70,000 years. Our people go back 70,000 years before y'all even existed. So there's no domestic violent evidence in ancient Aborigine Australia. There's no domestic violence evidence of the 10,000 years recorded Nile Valley civilization. There's no domestic violence. Now, since we're in Nile Valley, let's jump to Egypt real quick. Now, not only did Egypt have very specific immigration laws, which were broken by a pharaoh named Psammetichus, P.S. I know I'm going to spell this wrong, but the beginning spelling is P.S. P.S.E.T.T.I.M.E.C.U.S. Now, of course, that is the Greek spelling of that pharaoh's name, and he was a pharaoh around 800 BC. He's the one that broke the immigration laws and let the Assyrians in, let the Persians and all these different people, because what we don't understand, and if we read Stolen Legacy, the book Stolen Legacy, we will find that the ancient Egyptians didn't just let everybody in to their kingdom. They actually had protection boundaries. They actually fought off Asiatic hordes for thousands of years before the Hyksos finally came in around 1600 BC. Because remember, we are talking about the union of Upper and Lower Kemet around 4100 BC by Nemes or by Aha. Now, Nemes is the Greek term. Aha is the original name of that man who united the Upper and Lower Kingdoms, going back 4100 BC. That's the oldest date that these Europeans will allow you to know. And there's even pre-dynastic Egypt, which I'm not necessarily going to go into. But, well, matter of fact, let's go into that, because the reason why we know so much about pre-dynastic Egypt that comes before the uniting of the Upper and Lower Kingdom is because of the burial sites. Now, the reason I just reminded myself that this is actually significant, that there's the burial sites of pre-dynastic Egypt, all the bodies were buried in a fetal position. Because in pre-dynastic totemic times, you were buried the way you were born. And the way you were born was out of the womb in a fetal position. So when they buried you, they put you in a fetal position. Now, pardon me, because I want to give y'all there's what's called the Bagari period. Bugari, I believe. I'm sure that's a misspelling, but you will find it. The Bagari period. This goes back about 5000 BC, which is pre-dynastic. Now, of course, I'm sure it's way older than that, but unfortunately, we have to use the European terms. Remember, the European always wants to put you in a 6,000 to 10,000 year box, because if they expand that box any further, that they will be letting you know that they had no existence. So they love to put you in a 6,000, 10,000 year box. But we should be well aware that our history goes back millions upon millions upon millions of years on this planet. And I'm not talking about beating rocks together like cavemen. I'm talking about advanced civilization with advanced organic technology. But that's another subject. Now back to the Bagari sites of pre-dynastic Egypt. The reason I bring them up is not only did they respect the birth of man and woman coming from the woman's womb in a fetal position, but they also buried their dead in a fetal position as a form of going back to the mother's womb. Not only that, there is no evidence of any violence on these burials. There's no evidence of any violence on the bones, on the bodies whatsoever. And many of these burials are actually women and children if you go deeper. So to me, that's another form of evidence to let you know that the women were respected. And speaking of children, oh boy, there's just so much, because I'm going to be jumping around right now, back and forth. And I still am nowhere near close to European times. Now, I have to interject this because I forgot to. Within the Mesopotamian laws or the Hammurabi codes, children were actually treated worse than women. The children were abused more. The children were murdered. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Hammurabi codes, a boy will get his hands cut off if he lifts his hands to his father. Basically, when we look at these old Middle Eastern and Greek so-called empires of civilization, they had such great respect for the man alone that anything you did to a man was punishable by death or by mutilation. So when you look into these Hammurabi codes, which, as I said, go into over 200 different codes, they have codes against children to where if a children speaks against his father, raises his hand against his father, he could be either executed or mutilated. And we are talking about children. So we know they don't give a damn about women. And as I've said before numerous times on different lives, different videos and classes I've done, there are no children without women. So in a certain essence, the woman comes before the child and is more important than the child, because if I kill all female children and only have male children, then I don't have life coming forth anymore. And that goes back into infanticide, which was practiced commonly in Europe, which is the killing of female babies. Because basically it was a form of common law to murder female babies because every man wanted a male heir. So once again, these are the patriarchal societies that are ruling our mindsets today that unfortunately our Black women are adopting, as if it's Black men who came up with these laws, Black men who came up with these codes, Black men who instituted these behaviors and these violent means against women, which once again, there is no evidence in any indigenous culture, from the Aborigines of Australia, from the indigenous people of Africa, from the indigenous people of Central America. There is no evidence. And I dare anybody to find it. There is no evidence of domestic violence against their women in these ancient indigenous culture, pre-colonial. All right. Now, we touched on Hammurabi. We talked on Urukagina. We touched on La Plata. We touched on... Oh, yes. Now, back to ancient Egypt. Not only did they have immigration laws which did not let certain forms of Greeks into their kingdom to learn from their mystery school system, which you will find in Stolen Legacy. Great book. If it's not that, Ancient Future, get it. Stolen Legacy, get it. Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, get it. In Stolen Legacy, they go into the fact that there were strict immigration laws of Egypt to where not anyone could be let into these mystery school systems, which in order to be initiated, not only did you have to be circumcised, but you had to go through 40 days of fasting. You had to fast for 40 days, which, mind you, sound familiar? 40 days and 40 nights? Who was in the city of Ur? Who was in the cities of Chaldean? Who was learning from the Egyptians? Abraham. Who is copying the things I'm saying right now? The fake Jews. So while we're listening, let's make these connections as I'm saying these things that predate these so-called Jews we watch today. So in order to enter the mystery school system, you had to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. And you also had to get circumcised, which what you see on the temple walls of dark-skinned men circumcising light-skinned men. And these were Asiatic men. These were the Greek or the Ionians or the Macedonians who were entering the Egyptian school systems to learn the higher mysteries knowledge and come back and teach at the Greek and become all your different great Greek mathematicians that we love to talk about, Pythagoras and all these different people who learned directly from the Egyptians. So, just like the immigration laws, and I have a video called The Origins of Homosexuality as Status in Rape Culture on my YouTube. Should refer to it because I actually go into references that I don't have at hand right now. But not only did they have immigration laws in ancient Egypt, but they also had capital punishment laws. And what were these capital punishment laws constituting? The abuse of women. So in ancient Egypt, you can be murdered, castrated, or executed from abusing or raping a woman. These are your people. Now, mind you, these capital punishment laws were instituted between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. So that means these laws were only constructed because of the invasions that came and brought the behavior of rape. Because when we look at the old kingdom of Menes and Menahotep and all of these different kings who were Nubian kings all the way up to the 8th dynasty, we find no need for these laws. But until after the Hyksos have entered 1600 BC, now all of a sudden they have specific capital punishment laws where you will be murdered or castrated for the abuse and rape of a woman. Let's fast forward, shall we? So I can make the correlation to how this is true. As we speak, there are 3 countries in North Africa. Now, remind you, Egypt is North Africa. There are 3 countries in North Africa: Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. Within these 3 countries of North Africa, they have been working on going back to the traditional way of implementing the death penalty on rapists. But why? Because right now, as we speak, the rape of women and children are going rampant in these Arab Islamic-based countries. And when you look at these countries, these people don't look like you no more. They don't look at like you no more. And just like when we go to Egypt today, we don't find our ancient Egypts in Egypt today. We find the Arab today. And some of us are dumb enough to think that those are actual Egyptians. Excuse my terms. No mean to disrespect anyone. But we have to really think and utilize source knowledge. You were the original inhabitant of this entire planet. Every land that you touch, every land on this globe was a part of your first and mother and father civilizations. So when they refer to anything in a contemporary aspect, we're talking about after 500, 800, 900, 1,000 years of colonization. And as we should already know, the Arab was the first one to indoctrinate you with Islam long before the European came along. So the Arab was the first to institute your slavery, and the Arab was the first to institute Islam upon your people that taught you could beat a woman with a specific size stick that's the thickness of your thumb. This is what's called a thumb of rule, by the way. And this is also connected to the European, which we now know that the Arab worshiped the Greek. Because when I just did my research on this rule that I thought was only in the Quran, I find that it actually was called rule of thumb from the Greek, meaning that you couldn't beat a woman with a stick that was thicker than your thumb. So as long as the stick you choose to whoop a woman's behind with is the thickness of your thumb, you're okay. Go right ahead and whoop her behind. Rule of thumb, look it up. Now, let's go back into those North African countries I just named. What does it mean when they say, oh, we're going to resume capital punishment? That means capital punishment existed long before you invaded the country. But for some reason, you stopped capital punishment because you felt it was too primitive. But the only reason why capital punishment was implemented in those countries, which are by far older than the now inhabitants, is because when invaders came in, and finally we ran them out, the behavior was still rampant and the behavior was still amongst those original people. So now they said, okay, y'all people want to still act like Asiatics? Let's institute capital punishment. Any man who rapes a woman is either castrated or punishable by death. This is historical record. Why would any nation on this earth have capital punishment against a man for abuse of a woman if they commonly abuse women? That don't make no sense. I just went into the Hammurabi codes. I just went into the Urukagina codes to show you that there was no law to protect women. But when we go into Africa, all of a sudden there's capital punishment against men. And once again, look up, I sent the article to Queen Net, Mother Queen Auntie Nettie today. I sent the article. If you look up that article and you get a connection to it, you go down it, you start really reading into it. We are talking about Islamic nations that have gone crazy to the extent that they just have open abuse and open rape against their own women. And it got so bad that when the children get involved in the rape, now they go, hey, maybe we should bring back the tradition that was here before we took this shit over, which is capital punishment for abuse of a woman. This is your ancestors that installed this system. So let's please stop pretending that some black man in any form of ancient time or indigenous culture was whooping your behind for sport like the European did, because let's fast forward now and let's finally start the timeline that the beautiful Mother Queen Auntie Nettie gave us. Now let's fast forward. I went into all of that to finally get to the European timeline.
Okay, brother.
Let's go on. Yes.
Brother Mind Ascension. Before you go into that, we are going to take a break.
Okay. All right.
We're going to take a break. We're going to allow for any questions over what you've presented so far, and see if any of our viewers have any questions over any of the information thus far. And Osa, I'm not sure how long the question and answer period is. Can you tell us how long that's going to be? Soon as you unmute your mic.
I know. Yes, my mic was actually muted. So we can take, I kind of created like 30 minutes for people to be able to ask questions and for him to answer. So we can take as long as we need to, unless everybody's tired, we can go as long as we need to.
Okay. Will the
I can't be tired already.
Will
the
the viewers be able to show their face if they want to, or
they can type it in the direct message. So if you don't want your name stated, you could just say, don't say my name, just ask the question.
Okay. So it's open for questions.
Is it right now? Open for questions, or are we going to do a little?
Yes, we're going to open for questions for Brother Mind Ascension. If anybody has any questions over any of the information that he has shared so far. And remember, this is not a debate.
Yes,
it can be if you wanted to.
No,
I'm fine with that.
No, we're not going to do a debate. Oh, look at there. Akamaye, unmute your mic.
Yes, you're muted, sis.
We have
okay. I've been sitting here trying to figure this out. CJ just helped me figure out how to let y'all see me. So yeah, I'm here. Okay. He's helping me out.
Okay,
no,
now,
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to make sure y'all could see me, hear me, and I like the presentation though. I like the flow of the information, the way that it's going. I'm excited to get on to the rest of it. He was dropping.
Yes. Let me do a little introduction for those of you who are also viewing. If you don't know this young lady, Akamaye, we refer to her as Changing Frequencies. She is one of Oklahoma City's best female hip hop knowledgeist, is what I call a hip hop knowledgeist. Okay, definitely always changing the frequency and uplifting feminine consciousness alongside complementing masculinity consciousness. So she has an album out also called Freak Work, FREQ WORK. So Akamaye, take a minute, let them know where they can get your album, and then I'm glad to have you and glad that you're enjoying. Brother Mind Ascension is from
Mind Ascension.
Yes, Brother Mind Ascension. You can
good to see you and meet you.
Yes, you can follow him
too.
on Instagram. And
I will definitely do that. Thank you.
That's mind_ascension.ALKEMY on Instagram, and Mind Ascension is his YouTube channel. So be sure and hook up with him on Instagram, subscribe to his YouTube. The brother is you missed a lot. I'm just going to run over his credentials again. He's born in New York. Among other things, he is a native of Queens, and he's a motivational speaker, an upcoming lecturer. He's a spiritual guide. Brother Mind Ascension, what else you
Health advisor.
Yes.
I do practice divination as well.
Okay.
I don't like to use certain terms. because unfortunately many terms, even though that they are very well related to us and we're familiar with them, as I started the beginning of introducing myself, remember I said that we need to redefine a lot of things for ourselves. We need to create our own definition in order to change the energy of the words and terms that we use for ourselves. So certain terms and words I will not use to describe certain things that I do. But yes, that's basically it. I've been an advisor for very somewhat of a long time now, almost about 10 years now, dealing with health. My personal, who I consider my personal teacher when it comes to health, is Dr. Laila Africa. I have many so-called personal teachers that I've spent time with. Dr. Delbert Blair, he's a part of our ancestors right now. Dr. Phil Valentine. I'm also a part or affiliate of what's called Wada, World African Diaspora Union, who, excuse me, right now, all these names are going through the back of my mind. I want to give you Leonard Jeffries, who is one of the co-founders for Wada, who I have a personal affiliation with. He's still with us and looking great. And man, last time, I mean, this man is like, what, 80, 88, 89, something like that. He's up there. And, you know, I met him maybe about 6 months ago. I met him numerous times, but the last time I saw him about 6 months ago, maybe a year now almost. And the man was full of fire, him and his wife. And, you know, I just love seeing our people in our eldership, but still within our youth, because one thing that we don't know is we're all guaranteed a minimum of 120 years within this physical vessel. So when we talk about 60 years old and 70 years old, I can't stand when I hear our Black women or our Black men refer to themselves as old when they hit 60 or 70 or even 80, because you're not old.
Right.
You're actually what they call it in your middle, what they call it, you're middle aged.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you're actually middle aged. And you know, once we truly start adopting this mind frame, I can guarantee you it will prolong your life immediately. There are so many people, and this goes into my own personal ideology as well, but there are so many people that I've met in my life that because of their spirit alone, not their diet, they lived until their 90s and their 100s while still eating the crap that we judge today. You know, Dr. Ben Yakinen is one of them, lived to 96 years old. He was a big advocate for pork. Yeah. If anybody know, I got all his lectures. The man was always, he was always praising pork. Oh, and that man died at 96 years old. And unfortunately, I love to make correlations because I truly feel that the mind is always over the body. So when we put too much emphasis on the body instead of the mind, the next thing we know, the body becomes all there is, and it actually deteriorates faster and we age faster. Yes, and that's why we really should not even acknowledge time as anything real. It's merely an illusion because we live within cycles of expansion, moments, and experiences, not counting day to day to month to year until our death.
Right. Now, so, I have a question, but I have a question of my own, Brother Mind Ascension. So when my question to you is, you are definitely sure that there is nothing in African perspective when it comes to our African history of Black men, African men, related to them abusing the Black woman in terms of a matriarchal society, or did it all begin with a patriarchal society? Did they simultaneously exist together in Africa and there was no abuse? Or elaborate.
What I can, it's impossible for anybody to say absolutely sure in time periods they never existed. But what we can say is there is no archaeological, no papyri, no pottery, no monuments, no stone figures, nothing. Not only that, no osteological. This is dealing with the bones, which I already went to on La Plata. La Plata is the only historical place they find damage to women's bones. that is not related to direct war. And even in that, now you're bringing me to a whole nother thing, that even in that perspective, when we talk about prisoners of war, a lot of times in these regions, it was the women leading these armies. And especially when we go to the Candaces of Nubia. Okay. Now, we use the name Candace, but Candace actually means a queen ruler. And if you go to Nubia and Meroe, there were many women rulers, and you'll even find, I'm sure you can find it right now, if you type in Candaces of Nubia, they show queens, and she's voluptuous, she got curves and everything, and she's holding a sword above her head. And this is on a temple wall in Meroe. So what I'm saying is, there is no evidence or record. Whether they did it or not, how are we to know? We were not literally sitting there with the one man who smacked his wife one Tuesday in the year 9000 BC. You know what I'm saying? So I, as someone who stands on integrity and intelligence, I will never say something is absolute if I'm not physically there. But what I can say is it is absolutely not found in no record. And I'm always challenging people, if you can find pre-colonial, dynastic, or ancient record, I don't want nothing from the last 100 years. I don't want none from the last 200 years. I don't want none from the last 300, 400. I don't want none of that. If you cannot find me ancient record that talks about laws against, there's not even laws against women. Let's forget about the domestic violence. There's not even documented laws abusing or suppressing women. There's not even that. We don't find it in the negative confessions, in the 42 negative confessions. We don't find it in the 7 principles of Ma'at. We don't find it in, what's the other one? Ooh, I'm trying to go through all of, of course we don't find it in universal law, but that don't count. That's going beyond humans anyway. But when we look through our ancient principles and our records and our religions that we followed all the way down from Nubia, all the way up to, all the way up to Nubia, all the way down to Egypt, there's no record of a law saying no woman should do this. By the way, this leads me into a whole nother, and I love when y'all ask questions because all this crap starts flowing out of my subconscious. We could even go into the laws of Manu, M-A-N-U, type that in, the laws of Manu. And this was laws implemented by Assyrian invaders of India, meaning that anyone who was a Sudra, S-U-D-R-A, a Sudra, which is a black-skinned person, if a woman's eyes looked at food while it was being cooked, you had to throw out the food. The Sudra women were only allowed to travel at night because they were not to be seen. By the way, this is what gives birth to the untouchables, by the way, too. And we also got to remember, when we're always trying to pinpoint abuse of women, it's very challenging to do that because most of the time the abuse is coming from an invader to all the peoples, not just the women. So they were abusing the black children, the black men, and the black women. So when we look at the laws of Manu, which come under the Brahma aspect of the Assyrians, who the ancient Indish Kush Valley, settled by the Kushites, turned into India later, that they adopted from the Assyrians around 1500 to 1000 BC, we find that those laws were against black-skinned natives, both men and women. So I say that to say, when we keep trying to pinpoint only women being abused, I mean, I'm not saying this as a man, I'm saying this as a historian.
Right.
There is no pinpointing of just a woman getting her behind beat. There's prisoners of war, there's prisoners of captivity, and then even then, oh boy, I can go on forever. Even then, as a prisoner of war, you had the right. You had the right to study yourself out of servitude. So you could be a prisoner of war if you follow the laws of Ma'at, and if you abide by the laws of that region, you could raise yourself out of servitude and be as close as a noble to a king. And you don't even have to be from the region. You don't even have to be black, and they allowed you to do this. I could even go into the Moors when they were ruling Europe at the time, and we could talk about what's called the Umayyad, U-M-A-Y-Y-A-D, the Umayyad dynasty, which is the most African dynasty of the Islamic Moors. When the Moors entered Europe around 710 AD, they allowed all the religions to be practiced. They did not do what Christians did and say, listen, you don't believe in Jesus? Die, mother. They didn't do that. When they came in there with their Islamic belief, they did not force their Islamic belief on anybody. If Christians wanted to stay Christian, they could stay Christian. If you wanted to stay Hebrew or Sephardim, the original terms, Sephardim and all these things, you could stay that and you could practice amongst the people. That was the most peaceful time of Europe when African men ruled it. That was the most peaceful time for men. You even have European historians. One of them is Francis Champollion, or Francis Champollion, who is the one who is claimed to have deciphered the Medu Neter. He talks about how there is record of the Egyptians talking about the Tamahu being the most savage of races of the planet, and talking about how these groups of people was. So now let's fast forward to Herodotus. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Let's go backwards to Herodotus, who's supposed to be the father of history. Yes. And let's go into the Arab historians that came into Africa during the time they were invaded. They thought, you know why they thought their foundation of our primitiveness? The foundation of them saying that we were primitive was the fact that our women roamed freely. Yeah. This is documented. They said, oh my God, these people are nuts. They're letting their women just shop and control markets and roam all over the place. These people are crazy. So there is by far an abundance of evidence on the contrary to what is being adopted by our Black women today by cave feminist rhetoric nonsense. Because guess what? That is her fight, not yours. And it never was yours, by the way, never. I mean, for God's sake, how many monuments do we have that's the size of New York buildings dedicated to queens of kings? What kind of civilization that abuses women would build a monument the size? I mean, when we go to the Valley of the Kings, you have a whole set for queens. You have a whole, I mean, there's no comparison. The abundance is too crazy. It's just beyond. That's why it drives me crazy so much when I hear this nonsense that a lot of Black females, and I use that term specifically, are just regurgitating. They're just regurgitating it as if we did. Let's go to slavery, because I already mentioned the Casual Killing Act, which was the white mistress beating the female slave to death, because usually that was the mulatto child of her husband, who was the master, or the lover of her husband, who was the master. So she was the one beating the hell out of these slaves, not the male. Not only that, they wasn't just raping you, they was raping me too.
That is correct.
I mean, we have what's called in the Caribbean islands, Jamaica and Haiti, we have what's called the buck breaking system, to where they would literally rape the men in front of their women and their children. Right. So when we keep acting like abuse is exclusive to women, we are speaking from a purely European standard, because guess what? Well, even in Europe, they just, trust me, we can go into the Crusades, where they gave up their children. Oh Lord, the Crusades. Their children tried to save them during the times of the war between the Arabs and the Europeans, or the Christians and the Muslims. When the fathers of these children were captured by the Arabs, the children went on the crusade to save their kin. You know what these parents did? They exchanged their children for their own life. And this is well documented. They said, okay, listen, let us go and you can have our kids. That's what they did. And that's another, if you go into that same time period, this is why a delicacy at that time was child meat, child flesh. Yes. Cannibalism was rampant at this time. A lot of people don't like to talk about that, or they don't bring it up, but it was a delicacy to eat a baby. It was a delicacy. A lot of these parents during the crusade, these Christians that were fighting against these Islamic hordes who were winning, they would give their babies to them, and they would give their children to them. And a lot of the Gothic, we could even go before that into the Gothic era. Yes. The Goths who destroyed Rome, and through that destruction, they actually ended up sacrificing their children to these Gothic kings who are nothing but Nordic savages. They had no literacy, no nothing, so they couldn't read the propaganda that said the Roman was the strongest empire to bring fear in them. So because they couldn't read the propaganda, the Roman was just another group of people that they were raping and pillaging. So when they sacked the Roman Empire, and by the way, this is how the Moors were invited into Europe, by the way. You could find this in not the Moors of Spain, because that's after the Moors fall. I gotta get I know the book in my head right now, but it's a very deep volume. There's 3 volumes to it, and they go into how King Roderick, who was one of the Gothic kings, and another king, he captured his daughter, and he took his daughter as a slave. So what the king did, that was the king of Southern Europe at that time, that king wrote to the Islamic army of Tariq. If you study who's the first general to enter Europe, it's Tariq, because he wrote to him as a form of savior to come and protect them from the Goths. This is documented history. So what we're saying is Europeans called on Black people to save them from their damn self.
So it's safe to say then, because the whole point of this discussion is to take the finger that has been pointed at our Black men as abusers, not that they have not become such. However, what Wada wanted to do, as well as myself, is to allow you as a man, particularly, African descent, to present and to represent the men. I know some women may be thinking, well, how can you have a man talk about domestic violence and abuse when they're the ones doing it? Well, I wanted to come as a major in art history from the Western perspective to show, to get our Black women out of regurgitating and immediately adopting these notions that we have been abused by our men since the antiquity of this illusionary thing called time.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to absolutely allow you as a male historian, so that if we have any men that are viewing this, to restore your integrity as Black men, to not allow this other form of being stereotyped, because this is another form of Western perspectives and all of these another shackle to be placed upon our men. And as the keeper of our civilization, as women, myself, Osa, Akamaye, it is our feminine responsibility and duty to help set this record straight when it comes to our men, and we are going to, in the second half of this, we're going to get into the timeline, and we're going to see or hear how our men, and as you heard him, our men have been, this is where domestic violence against men, ours. Now, we already know how that violence has been taking place upon men of other cultures within their own culture. However, we're talking about domestic violence against our men that was perpetrated upon our men in front of our eyes to terrify us as Black women, during the slave diaspora, to alter our minds. They have done everything possible to disfigure the integrity of our intimate connection as polarity. You spoke about polarity, brother mine, Ascension, polarity and gender and feminine energy, to disfigure this sacred complement between the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine as we should know it. So that was the reason why I asked that question. So I'm going to get off of it. And if anybody else has a question for Brother Mind. Please present it.
I see Osa.
Also,
Oh, wait. Osa, I don't know.
You.
Yeah, you're very low. You're very low.
Can you hear me better?
There you go. There you
There we
go.
go. Okay, so so I know we still have the second half of the lecture. At some point, can we go in how the abuse of men has translated into the abuse of women in modern day, especially when we're talking about the African American community?
Yes.
And
So sorry. When Queen Mother Nettie, Auntie Nettie was going, and I didn't want to interrupt her, but that's exactly what I was going to start touching on. You know why? Because I know, let's just be honest, I know that many of the women that tuned in for this particular topic did not tune in to maybe hear certain things outside of what they might have assumed this would be. So I definitely want to fast forward to that because while Queen Mother Net was speaking, she was bringing up good points that I definitely wanted to interject, but I did not want to be rude. Also remember, and after I make these points, I'm going to get exactly into what we're dealing with today. Also remember that during this time of slavery, which, by the way, they done made movies out of, they done documented, who was forced and trained to beat their women. The black slave was forced and trained, and not only that, it's given to us in a opposite fashion, because they like to call the man who beat the woman Uncle Tom, but it actually was the reverse. It was Sambo. It was Sambo who was one of the overseers who was forced to beat the woman. Uncle Tom was the one stepping in to try to take the beating for her, and he wasn't allowed to do that. So we got to take in consideration that not only have we been taught how to rape each other by far of slave breeding, because that's training for rape. When they put a bag over your head and they call you a mother effer because you're effing your mother because she's the only one on the plantation who is of birth age. Therefore, she needs to be breeded by the son who is the stud. We can go into the stud culture, which, by the way, doesn't even originate with Europe, because I can give y'all some real, it actually originates with the Moors, because the Moors understood the science of mixed breeding. And when they entered Europe, Europe was at such a low state of almost being declined in their population. Well, they actually instituted brothels of what was called stud Moors. And you can find this in a book called Moorish Whore. And there's a few books you can find this in. But basically, the Moor understood the science of creating the mulatto to extend the lifespan of the European. And so they would actually have very specific Moorish men who were known as studs, who would have sex with Scandinavian women and Slavic women, which where the term slave comes from anyway, Slavic. So they created brothels that were the opposite of what we see. Instead of a whole bunch of women naked walking around, it was black African men who were specific tools to impregnate white women and create a mulatto breed of Europeans to sustain their lifespan utilizing melanin. This is very well documented. The European took this knowledge, which I could do a whole thing on the Moors giving so much. They gave so much to these people that made these people, to be honest with you, and no offense, because all of us are technically Moors, all of us. But no offense to the Moors who practice what they practice today, but I am guaranteed, and I stand on my square, and I invite any Moor to challenge me. It is a guarantee that these white people would not be nowhere near in the power structure that they are if it was not for the Moors. So they took the science of breeding, of mixed breeding, and they distorted it to slave breeding. So then they took one of the youngest slaves whose penis could stay hard for any reason, and that was now called a stud. And he was rewarded for impregnating his sister, his mother, his aunt, his cousin, anybody that was on the plantation with a vagina and past the age of 13 of a birthing age. He was enforced to impregnate and rape her so they can breed. Remember, we were not considered human beings. So the same way as you breed cattle, horses, and all this, you're not worried about what the horse thinks about the other horse. You're not worried about what the cow thinks about the other cow. One got a penis, one got a vagina. That's all you need to know. You're going to put them together. And they will put bags over each other's heads a lot of the times. So, and this is where the term motherfucker comes from. That's why if you say that to a lot of white people, they get very offended because they know the truth. Black people, a lot of black people don't know the truth about that word. But I've been on work sites with Italians and Polish and stuff. If you say motherfucker, they get very offended because they know what that really means. So now let's fast forward, because even though I got so much more, okay, let me just get into one more thing. Let's talk about a time in Europe where there was a law called prima nocta, P-R-I-M-A-N-O-C-T-A. Now, there was many terms for this term that I'm bringing up, but the more traditional, more popular term is called the right of first night or obligation of lords. So basically, this was a law that any woman who was married on the land of a landlord, which is where we get the term today, landlord, any woman who was married on the land of any high nobleman in Europe, he had to have sex with her before the husband did on their wedding night. And that was a law. So we got to understand the mindset. So basically what I'm saying is, I make a law that if you choose to marry a woman, I have the right to rape her before you have sex with her. And they made movies about this. White people don't lie in their movies. Braveheart, if you get the movie Braveheart, the very beginning of Braveheart, the reason why he becomes so rebellious is because his wife gets murdered for fighting against her rapists. And so they killed her because technically by law, you can't resist that rape because it's a noble royal law. So if you fight against your rapist, they'll murder you as a woman, because to touch a nobleman is like touching a king. Let's get that out the way. Let's fast forward. Men today are beating on their black women. Excuse me. Males today are beating on their black women. Males today have adopted the mindset and the behavior of not only abuse of their women, but self-abuse of themselves. Now, we got to ask ourselves, is this some overnight thing?